She never picks up a weapon. She never appears on screen alive. She never speaks a single word of dialogue in the entire game. And yet without her, none of it happens. Not one battle. Not one emotional breakthrough. Not one moment between a father and his son that made you feel something real. She is the reason God of War 2018 is not just a game about fighting gods. She is the reason it is one of the greatest stories ever told in any medium. Her name was Laufey, and everything you experienced in that game, she planned. Every single piece of it. Today we are going to talk about who she really was, what she knew, what she sacrificed, why she made the choices she made, and what her legacy means for the entire future of this franchise. Stay with me for the next 30 minutes, because by the time this video is over, you will see this entire saga completely differently. I promise you that. Welcome back. If you are new here, this is the channel where we go beneath the surface of the stories that games tell us. We do not just talk about what happened. We talk about why it happened and what it means and why it still lives in your head long after you put the controller down. And Laufey the Just is exactly the kind of subject this channel exists for. So let us build this from the very beginning and leave nothing out. God of War 2018 does something almost no big budget action game has ever done. It opens with a funeral.
No explosión.
No enemy to fight. No power fantasy. Just a man and a boy standing in front of a burning body in the middle of the wilderness, and neither of them knows how to talk to the other. The body on that pyre is Laufey. And from that first moment the game is asking you a question. Who was she? What did she mean to these two people? And why does her absence feel like the weight that everything else in this story is built on top of? The game spends the next 20 or so hours answering that question slowly and carefully and beautifully. But today we are going to answer it all at once. And I think when you hear all of it together in one place, it is going to hit differently than it ever has before. So who was Laufey? Let us start with what she was before we talk about who she was. Laufey was one of the Jotnar, the giants of Norse mythology. And I need you to reset whatever image that word brings to mind, because the giants in God of War are not just large creatures. They are not brutes or monsters. The Jotnar in this universe are ancient beyond measure. They predate the Aesir gods. They predate Odin. They predate the current shape of the Nine Realms itself. And they possess something that no other race in this universe has. They can see the future. Not like fortune tellers with vague predictions. Not like guesses or feelings. The Jotnar have a genuine connection to the flow of fate. They can perceive possible futures with enough clarity that they paint them onto cave walls. Detailed murals that function as historical records of things that have not happened yet. This ability is called seership, and it is the most threatening power in the entire Norse mythological universe. And the reason it is so threatening is because of one specific god. Odin. Odin the All-Father spent centuries obsessed with fate. Obsessed with controlling it. Obsessed with knowing what was coming so he could position himself to survive it. He gave up his eye for wisdom. He hung himself from Yggdrasil for knowledge. He pursued every possible source of prophetic information across every realm. And the giants, with their natural inborn ability to read fate, represented something Odin could not tolerate. Knowledge he could not control. Visions he could not access or edit or suppress. So he did what tyrants do when they encounter something they cannot control. He tried to destroy it. He hunted the giants. Systematically. Relentlessly. Over hundreds of years. He drove them out of Midgard. He pursued them across realms. He killed them one by one until the Jotnar went from a thriving ancient civilization to a handful of survivors desperately trying to preserve whatever they could of their culture and their knowledge and their identity. By the time God of War 2018 begins, the giants are essentially gone. And Laufey was one of the very last ones. Maybe the last one still living in Midgard at all. Now here is the first thing about Laufey that I need you to really absorb. Because this is where her story stops being sad and starts being extraordinary. She did not just survive Odin's purge. She outplayed him. Think about what that means. Odin is not a cartoon villain. He is ancient and cunning and paranoid and brilliant, and he has resources and intelligence networks and magical capabilities that span every realm of existence. And Laufey, this last surviving giant woman living quietly in the wilderness of Midgard, managed to conceal an entire realm from him. Jotunheim, the homeland of her people. A whole dimension. Hidden. For years. while Odin searched and raged and sent his forces across every corner of the 9 realms looking for it. And he never found it, because Laufey and her people built protections that his power could not penetrate. That is not luck. That is not fate. That is genius. That is a level of strategic thinking that surpasses every god in this universe, including the one who considered himself the smartest being alive. And then on top of that, she came to Midgard. She lived there openly enough to build a home, to fall in love, to raise a child, all while Odin's spies were everywhere, all while being one of the very beings he was hunting. And he never found her either. Not until it was too late to matter. Laufey the Just was not just a mother and a wife. She was the most strategically gifted character in the entire God of War universe. And the game never once says that explicitly. It just shows you the results of her thinking and trusts you to understand what you are seeing. Now I want to spend some real time on the question that I think is the most fascinating and most underappreciated question in all of God of War lore. Why Kratos? Out of every being in the 9 realms. Out of every warrior and every god and every powerful creature that existed in this universe. Why did Laufey choose the ghost of Sparta as the man she would love? As the father of the child she needed to bring into the world? The lazy answer that some people give is fate. She saw it in a vision, so she followed it. But I want you to think about why that answer is not just wrong but actually disrespectful to everything her character represents. If Laufey was just following a predetermined script with no real agency, then she is not a character. She is furniture. She is a mechanism. And everything we know about her tells us she was the opposite of that. So let us think about this the way Laufey would have thought about it. Strategically. She was carrying the most important mission her people had ever conceived. She needed to bring a specific kind of child into the world. A child who was half giant through her and half something else through his father. A child who could walk between worlds and cultures and power structures in ways that a full giant or a full god could not. A child who would one day carry the last remnant of the Jotnar people to safety. What kind of father does that child need? Let us go through this carefully because every requirement points directly to Kratos and only Kratos. First requirement. The father had to be completely outside of Odin's existing power structure. Every Norse god owed something to Odin. Every giant was being hunted by him. Every mortal was under his influence in some way. She needed someone Odin had never encountered. Someone with no existing relationship or history in the 9 realms. Someone Odin's prophecies and intelligence networks had not accounted for. A foreign element. An unknown variable. Someone who could move through this story without Odin being able to predict or control him because Odin had no data on him at all. Kratos had just destroyed the entire Greek pantheon and fled to the Norse realms. He was completely unknown here. He was the ultimate wild card. Second requirement. The father had to be powerful enough to protect their child against literal gods. Not just strong. Not just a capable warrior. But genuinely terrifyingly powerful. The kind of powerful that makes divine beings reconsider their choices. Because her son was going to be a target the moment anyone understood what he was. He needed a father who could stand between him and the worst threats in the 9 realms and survive. Kratos had killed gods. He had killed titans. He had killed death itself on multiple occasions. There was nobody in any realm more qualified on that particular requirement. Third requirement. The father had to have the capacity for love. This is the one people overlook, and it is actually the most important one. Laufey did not just need a bodyguard for her son. She needed a father who could eventually, even if it took enormous effort and pain and years of growth, become someone who actually parentied this child with love. Because the mission was not just to keep Atreus alive. The mission was to raise him into a person who was worthy of carrying her people's legacy. That requires love. Real love. Not performance. Not duty. Actual emotional connection. And Kratos, for all his walls and his distance and his refusal to show vulnerability, was capable of that. She could see it. Under all of that ash and guilt and grief and rage, there was a man who had loved deeply before, who had lost deeply before, who felt things so intensely that he had spent decades running from his own feelings because they were too overwhelming to face. That is not a man without love. That is a man with more love than he knows what to do with and no safe place to put it. She gave him a safe place. She gave him a son who would eventually crack him open and let it out. Fourth requirement. The father had to be unpredictable. Odin was a planner. He prepared for every contingency. He tried to read every possible future. But a Greek god who had no place in Norse mythology, who operated on completely different instincts and values and experiences, was someone Odin could not easily model or predict. Every move Kratos makes in the 9 realms is one that Odin's calculations did not account for, because Odin had never met anyone like him. Laufey understood that unpredictability was itself a weapon. Kratos was the only being in any realm who satisfied all 4 of those requirements simultaneously. And Laufey, with her ability to perceive the shape of possible futures, recognized that. She chose him with her eyes completely open, knowing exactly who and what he was. And then she did something that I think is the most quietly radical thing any character in this story does. She loved him anyway. Not strategically. Not as a means to an end. She genuinely loved him. And we know this not from anything she says, because she never says anything in the game. We know it from how Kratos talks about her. This man who spent an entire Greek saga being practically incapable of any emotional vulnerability stumbles when he talks about her. He goes quiet. He pauses in ways he does not pause for anything else. When Atreus asks about his mother, Kratos does not give tactical answers. He remembers. You can hear it. She reached something in him that nothing else had reached in decades. That is not strategy. That is love. Real love. And she had it for him while knowing that she would leave him. Because here is the part of Laufey's story that genuinely wrecks me every time I think about it carefully. She was a seer. She could perceive the future. Which means she knew. She knew she was going to die before the journey began. She knew she would not be there when Atreus got sick on the road. She knew she would not be there when Kratos finally started to open up. She knew she would not be there for any of it. She painted a mural in Jotunheim that depicts the entire journey of God of War 2018 in extraordinary detail. She painted moments between Kratos and Atreus that she never witnessed, because she had already seen them. She saw the whole story play out before it happened. And then she went ahead and lived her life inside that story, loving these people, building a home with them, raising her son, knowing the whole time that she was going to leave them and that the leaving was necessary and that she could not change it even if she wanted to. Do you understand what kind of person that requires you to be? To live with that knowledge every single day. To look at your husband and your child and know exactly what is coming and choose to be fully present anyway. To choose love in the face of certain loss. That is not weakness. That is the most extraordinary form of courage I can imagine. Most people, when they know something terrible is coming, either collapse under the weight of it or spend all their energy trying to prevent it. Laufey did neither. She accepted it. And then she used every moment she had to prepare as thoroughly as she possibly could so that the people she loved would be okay after she was gone. And the preparation she left behind is honestly breathtaking when you look at all of it together. She taught Atreus to read the language of the giants. She knew there would come a moment when he needed to read things that only someone with that knowledge could read. So she taught him while he was young enough that it felt natural. She told him stories about the giants and their history and their values. Stories that felt like entertainment but were actually education. She was teaching him who his people were and what they stood for so that when he finally encountered them he would recognize something of himself in them. She gave him a name in her language. Loki. She made sure he knew that name even if he did not fully understand what it meant yet. Because names matter. Names carry identity. She was making sure that no matter what the Norse world tried to tell him about who he was, he had another name. A giant name. A name that connected him to her people. And then she did something so quietly brilliant that it almost does not register the first time you realize what it means. She hid the map to Jotunheim inside her own ashes. Inside her own remains. She turned herself into the final key. She made her death the last piece of the puzzle that her son needed to complete the journey she had designed for him. She used her own mortality as a resource. She weaponized her own death in the most loving way that anything has ever been weaponized. That is Laufey the Just. That is what that title means. Now let us talk about where she comes from, because the conversation about mythology versus the game version of Laufey is genuinely fascinating, and it reveals a lot about the creative choices Santa Monica Studio made. In actual Norse mythology, Laufey is not a major figure. She appears primarily as the mother of Loki, the trickster god. And one interesting detail is that Loki in mythology is sometimes called Laufeyjason, which means son of Laufey, rather than being identified by his father's name, which was Farbordi. In Norse culture, identification by the mother's name instead of the father's was unusual and significant. It suggests that even in the original mythology there was something about Laufey that made her the more notable parent. The game takes that seed and grows something completely different from it. Santa Monica Studio kept the name. They kept the family relationship. They made Fabori, whose name translates roughly to cruel striker or dangerous biter, into Kratos, which is honestly perfect casting. And they transformed Laufey from a minor mythological footnote into the most architecturally important character in a massive franchise. What they specifically avoided is what most stories do with dead mothers. The dead mother trope in storytelling is usually just a motivation dispenser. The mother dies so the protagonist has something to be sad about or something to avenge. She exists as an absence, a hole in the story shaped like a person. Laufey is the opposite of that. She is not an absence. She is a presence that never leaves. She is in every lesson Atreus carries. She is in every moment Kratos chooses growth over age. She is in the cave paintings. She is in the name Atreus does not yet fully understand. She is in the ashes that become a map. She is in the architectural bones of every emotional moment in that game. She haunts it. Not like a ghost. Like a foundation. Like the ground the whole thing is built on top of. God of War Ragnarok takes her legacy even further. In that game, Atreus is wrestling with what it means to be Loki. He knows his giant name now. He knows his heritage. But he is trying to figure out if he is destined to be the Loki of mythology. The trickster. The chaos agent. The one who triggers the end of everything. And the answer that the game gives him is rooted entirely in Laufey's influence. Because Atreus has a moral center that the mythological Loki arguably never had. He makes mistakes. He is impulsive and hot-headed and sometimes reckless. But he genuinely cares about people. He is moved by suffering. He wants to do what is right even when he does not know what right looks like. That compassion, that sense of justice, that instinctive reaching toward goodness. That is not something he learned from Kratos, the god of war. That is something Laufey put in him through stories and values and the simple daily experience of being loved by someone who believed he was worth loving completely. In Ragnarok, we also learn more about what the giants did at the end. They did not just flee. They preserved themselves, their souls, their memories, their histories. They found ways to carry their identity forward even through extinction. They went into the end with intentionality. They transformed instead of simply disappearing. And Laufey was the ultimate expression of that instinct. She transformed herself into her mission, into her son, into ashes that held a map, into lessons and stories and a name and a language and values that would keep running long after she stopped breathing. Her plan did not end with Ragnarok. Her plan outlived Ragnarok. And at the end of that second game, when Atreus makes his choice to go searching for whatever remains of his mother's people, he is not just following his own heart. He is completing the mission she designed. He is the last expression of something she set in motion years before he was old enough to understand any of it. I want to talk about what Laufey means thematically because I think this is where the conversation gets really important. God of War on the surface is a game about a father and a son going on an adventure and fighting gods and monsters. But underneath that, it is a game about cycles. About whether the terrible things done to you inevitably become the terrible things you do to others. About whether a man who was turned into a weapon by the gods who claim to love him can actually become something different. Kratos spent his entire Greek story being used. Ars used him. The gods of Olympus used him. Everyone who claimed to help him was actually manipulating him toward their own ends. He was never loved without agenda. He was never chosen just because someone wanted him. Until Laufey. And I think that is the thing about her that changed him most fundamentally. Not her strategy. Not her seership. Just the fact that she saw exactly who he was with all of it visible and she chose him. Not for what he could do. Just for who he was. That had never happened to Kratos before. Not once in his entire existence. And it broke something open in him. Something that eventually, after a lot of pain and a lot of growth and a very long walk across the 9 realms, became the father that Atreus needed. For Atreus, she represents something even more essential. She represents the answer to the question that drives him for most of both games. The question of belonging. He spends God of War 2018 not knowing what he is. He is sick and he does not know why. He is powerful in ways he cannot explain. His father keeps secrets from him. The world around him reacts to him in ways that do not make sense. He does not know where he fits. And his mother knew all of this was coming. She knew he would spend years not knowing. And she left him an answer anyway. She left him her language so he could read her people's words. She left him her name for him so he could carry their identity. She left him a destination so he could find where he came from. She left him values so he would know who he wanted to be even before he knew who he actually was. She said to him through all of that preparation, "You belong. You have a people. You have a heritage. You have a name and a history and a home that was built for you before you were born. You are not lost. You just have not found your way there yet. And I have already laid the path. In a game full of violence and mythology and enormous dramatic moments. That is the emotional truth at the very center of everything. And Laufey put it there. Let me spend a few minutes on the questions that God of War has not answered yet. Because Laufey's story has deliberate gaps. And I believe those gaps are intentional. I believe they are doors that future games or other media are meant to walk through. The first and most obvious one is, how did Laufey and Kratos actually meet? We know Kratos had been living in isolation in Midgard for years. We know Laufey was one of the last giants alive and presumably being very careful about who knew she existed. The actual story of how these two specific people found each other in the vast wilderness of Midgard. We have never seen it. And I genuinely believe it is one of the most interesting untold stories in gaming right now. What did that first meeting look like? What did she see in him immediately? How long did it take for him to let her in? What did she tell him about herself, and what did she keep back? I would experience that story in any format it came in. The second gap is, how much did she actually tell Kratos before she died? The game implies that Kratos knew more about Laufey and about Atreus than he initially shares with his son. But the specifics of what she told him are never fully revealed. Did she share her visions with him? Did she tell him explicitly what the journey ahead would require? Did they sit together and talk about the future she had seen? Or did she prepare him in more indirect ways? The third gap is the mural in Jotunheim. That mural depicts the events of God of War 2018 with stunning accuracy. Someone with prophetic vision and intimate knowledge of the people involved created it. The most logical answer is Laufey. But when did she paint it? Did she make the journey to Jotunheim to paint it herself? Did she somehow send the vision to others who painted it for her? And how far does the mural's prophecy actually extend? Because it shows things beyond the end of the first game. Which means her vision went further than anyone might assume. Which raises the question of how much she saw of Ragnarok and what comes after. These are not loose ends. These are invitations. Santa Monica Studio built Laufey's story with enough structural gaps that there is clearly more to tell. And I think when they tell it, everything we already know is going to look different. Let me bring all of this together now, because I think there is one central thing about Laufey that every other thing we have talked about points toward. One quality that defines her above everything else and explains why the game calls her what it calls her. Laufey the Just. What does it mean to be just? Not in the legal sense. Not in the sense of courts and verdicts and punishments, but in the deepest human sense. To be just means to see clearly and to act in alignment with what you see. To give each thing and each person what they actually need. To be honest with yourself about what is real even when what is real is hard. To act with integrity even when integrity costs you everything. Laufey was just in every dimension of that word. She was just with herself. She did not pretend her death was not coming. She did not spend her remaining time in denial or in desperate attempts to escape what she had seen. She faced it. And she used the time she had with clear eyes and full presence. She was just with her people. The giants were dying. She could not change that. But she could carry their legacy forward. She could make sure that something of them survived. She could turn their ending into a transformation instead of just a loss. She was just with Kratos. She chose him with full knowledge of who he was. She did not love a fantasy version of him or a version she hoped to create. She loved the actual person. The difficult, broken, complicated, grieving man who had done terrible things and was trying to be something better. She gave him real love. Not conditional love. Not strategic love. Real love. And she was just with her son. She gave him everything she could. She prepared as thoroughly as any person has ever prepared for anything. And then she trusted him. She trusted that what she had planted in him was enough. That he would grow into it. That he would find his way to the destination she had pointed him toward. Justice. Real justice. The justice of a life lived in complete alignment with what you believe is true and what you believe is good. Even when it demands everything from you. Even when it takes your life. That is who she was. God of War 2018 begins with her funeral. Fire consuming the body of a woman you never got to meet. And the first time you play the game, it is heartbreaking in a simple way. A boy has lost his mother. A man has lost his wife. There is grief here and you can feel it. But now, after everything we have talked about, after seeing who she really was and what she really did and how far ahead she really thought and how deeply she really loved, that funeral is not just sad anymore. It is the beginning. It is the moment her final move goes into effect. The ashes that hold the map to her people's home. The grief that forces a father and son to finally face each other. The absence that creates the space the journey needs to happen in. She arranged all of it. Not because fate demanded it. Because she chose it. Because she looked at all the possible futures available to her and she chose the one where her son had the best chance. The one where the giants were not simply forgotten. The one where love outlasted everything that tried to destroy it. She is not gone. She never left. She is in every moment of that game. She is the warmth behind every cult scene. She is the love beneath every act of violence. She is the plan that everything else is built on top of. Laufey the Just. The woman who planned everything. And loved everyone. And gave all of it away so that something worth saving could survive. That is what God of War is really about. Underneath the epic battles and the mythological spectacle and the incredible production design and the breathtaking music. It is about what we leave behind. It is about whether love is powerful enough to reach past death and change the future. It is about a mother who saw the end of her world coming and refused to let it be the end of everything. It is about a father who was given one more chance to be something better than what he had been. It is about a boy who carried more weight than any child should carry and rose to meet it because someone had believed in him before he could believe in himself. Laufey made all of that possible. In silence. In sacrifice. In love. Thank you for being here for this entire conversation. If this video gave you something new, if it made you feel something or see something differently, please hit that like button right now. It is the single most important thing you can do for this channel and it takes you 1 second. Subscribe if you want more of this because we go this deep every single week and we are just getting started. And leave a comment with your answer to this question. What do you think the last thing Laufey ever said to Kratos was? I want to read every single response. Until next time, stay curious, stay just. The greatest acts of love are the ones nobody ever sees, but they change everything anyway.